Welcome, everybody. Welcome to this podcast. It is sponsored and co-hosted by the Jack Layton Chair. I'm so pleased to be here with Theo from Council Fire. The two of us are going to discuss the Spirit Garden, an initiative from Council Fire. But first, let me introduce ourselves. I am the Jack Layton Chair. I'm a professor with some community practice background. I'm interested in bringing community-oriented engagement to the university. And as the chair, which honors Jack Layton, who was the leader of the New Democratic Party of Canada, and taught at the university. In honor of him, I've taken a multidisciplinary approach, particularly around politics, sociology, gender, colonial relations, anti-racism, and feminism. As the Leighton Chair, we've sponsored a number of community-oriented educational opportunities, and I'm really looking forward to today and talking about Theo's work. Theo is Toronto Council Fire Native Cultural Centre strategic planner, and he's a member of the Spirit Garden Project, which is the focus of today's discussion. He's a graduate of McMaster University and the University of Toronto, with a professional certificate in project management. Theo's doctoral work explores contemporary relations between Indigenous people and non-Indigenous people with a focus on newcomers. Theo will open with a Thanksgiving address.
Thank you, Ken, for that wonderful introduction. So generally at Council Fire, we don't do land acknowledgements, and I'll get a little bit into that later. However, we do Thanksgiving addresses. So in the language in Oneida, it's called Ganawela Duxla. So that's what the Thanksgiving address is. And there are different versions of it. I've chosen a shorter version because of the time we have today. However, it captures everything that needs to be said. So here goes. Everyone, let us put our minds together as one. We thank the people that have gathered or are listening, and we see the cycle of life continue. We have been given the duty to live in balance and harmony with each other and all living things. We are thankful to our mother, the earth, for she gives us all that we need for life. We give thanks to all waters of the world for quenching our thirst and providing us with strength. Water is life. We turn our minds to all the fish life in the water. They were introduced to cleanse and purify the water. They also give themselves to us as food. Now we turn towards the vast fields of plant life. As far as the eye can see, the plants grow, working many wonders. They sustain many life forms. With one mind, we turn to honor and thank all the food plants we harvest from our gardens. Since the beginning of time, the grains, the vegetables, beans, and berries have helped the people survive. Many other living things draw strength from them too. Now we turn to all the medicine herbs of the world. From the beginning, they were instructed to take away sickness. They are always waiting and ready to heal us. We are happy that they are still amongst us. Those special few remember how to use these plants for healing. We gather our minds together to send greetings and thanks to all the animal life in the world. They have many things to teach us as people. We are honored by them. They help give up their lives so we may use their bodies as food for our people. We see them near our homes and in the deep forests. We now turn our thoughts to the trees. The earth has many families of trees who have their own instructions and uses. Some provide us with shelter and shade, others with fruit, beauty, and other useful things. Many people of the world use a tree as a symbol of peace and strength. We are thankful to the power we know as the four winds. We hear their voices in moving air as they refresh and purify the air we breathe. They help us bring the change of seasons. From the four directions they come, bringing us messages and giving us strength. Now we turn to the west, where our grandfather, the thunder beings live. The lightning and thundering voices, they bring with them the water that renews life. We now send greetings and thanks to our eldest brother, the sun. Each day without fail he travels the sky from east to west, bringing the light from afar. New day, he is the source of all the fires of life. We put our minds together to give thanks to our eldest grandmother, the moon, who lights the nighttime sky. She is the leader of all women all over the world, and she governs the movement of the ocean tides. By her changing face we measure time, and it is the moon who watches over the arrival of children here on earth. We give thanks to the stars who are spread across the sky like jewelry. We see them in the night, helping the moon to light darkness and bring dew to the gardens and growing things. When we travel at night, they guide us home. We gather our minds to greet and thank the enlightened teachers who have come to help throughout the ages. When we forget how to live in harmony, they remind us of the way we were instructed to live as people. Now we turn our thoughts to the Creator, or Great Spirit, and send greetings and thanks for all the gifts of creation. Everything we need to live a good life is here on this Mother Earth. For all the love that is still around us, we gather our minds together as one and send our choicest words of greetings and thanks to the Creator. We have now arrived at a place where we end our words. Of all things we have named, it was not our intention to leave anything out. If something was forgotten, we leave it to each individual to send such greetings and thanks in their own way. Now our minds are one. Donnie.
Thank you, Theo. Thanks very much. I'm now going to introduce the Council Fire's All Nations drummer, who have agreed to open and close our discussion today. So Council Fire's All Nations Junior is a First Nations powwow-style youth drum group that started 8 years ago to bring empowerment and identity to the youth. The All Nations Junior singers consist of youth that come from many different nations and communities across Turtle Island. These nations include Dakota, Ojibwe, Chippewa, and Cree singers and drummers. The drum started with just one singer and now has many singers of all ages teaching each other anew. Welcome to the Council Fire's All Nation Juniors.
So hello, Ryerson University. My name's Kevin Meyer, and I'm a Dakota from Birkdale, Manitoba. I work at Toronto Council Fire as the YLP coordinator. We were asked to do an opening song for you guys at Ryerson. So I brought our All Nation Juniors. We got Jaden here, Joey, Anthony Gladu, our KZN worker at Toronto Council Fire, Dakota Meyer, DJ, Caitlin, Albert, and we're about to see you guys an opening song. We hope you guys like it.
Hey!
Theo, thanks so much for joining me today. It's a pleasure always to talk to you, and I'm really looking forward to this discussion. I think I'll start. Let's just start by, first of all, you talking a bit about the work of Council Fire, and we'll follow that by you talking about yourself at Council Fire, your position, and the type of work you do.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for having me first and foremost. It's a pleasure again to speak with you and have this honor and sharing about the project and Council Fire in general. So I hope I do this justice. Council Fire was created in 1978. In its early days, it was a place where predominantly First Nations men would gather in the urban center for meals, for networking, for hanging out, and then as these that we called them potlucks, as these potlucks grew in size and a number of people, a center started taking shape, and more services and programs were offered to these individuals. You have to remember that in the 1960s, a lot of First Nations individuals came from the communities to the urban centers looking for different opportunities, whether it was employment, etc. So Council Fire was developed to meet the needs of these individuals. We moved into our current building in 1997 at the corner of Dundas and Parliament. And since then, Council Fire has become a staple in the Regent Park, Cabbagetown, and downtown East End neighborhoods. We offer a number of services and programs. We are a wraparound agency, anything from prenatal programming to celebration of life programs. We offer currently during the pandemic, we offer 3 meals per day at the eastern entrance of our building with takeaway meals. We offer food hampers. We offer cultural programming. Majority of our programs are now virtual during the pandemic. However, nothing has stopped or diminished during the pandemic. In terms of my role, I it's a little bit of a story. I initially volunteered with a number of agencies, Indigenous organizations in Toronto. One of them was the Toronto Aboriginal Support Services Council, which is a consortium of 25 Indigenous service providers that served the Indigenous community in the city. And through that work, I got to know Council Fire a little bit. I did a little bit of engagement with the center, and then when I started my doctoral studies at Ryerson, I was invited to join the center in one of the special projects, which is the Spirit Garden. In those days, we referred to the project as the Restoration of Identity Project, and I'll get a little bit into that later in our discussion. My role is, I always say this, and I say this to anyone that listens, it's I think I have one of the best jobs in the world. Every single day is unique and different. And my position is called strategic planner, and it's very related to the Spirit Garden and to ensure that the project is completed in a honorable, timely, and a good way. However, I'm still involved in a lot of the day-to-day operations at the center. So, for example, on a certain day, I can be asked to set up a laptop or a phone for a community member. I can be asked to make a delivery to a residential school survivor who is in a hospital. I can be asked to be on a planning committee for a large event that we're putting together, or I can be in a meeting with a city councilor or a bureaucrat or whatever. And so it varies a lot, and it's very fulfilling work, maybe that's the nature with a lot of nonprofits. I think still though with Council Fire, the thing that sets us apart is we don't really work in silos or departments. We work together as a team, and that, and it's always for the benefit of the community. So that's why all of us as team members, we do work that is all over the place, really, right? Whatever needs to get done. And so it's very fulfilling work for me, and a privilege to be there. That's my role there.
That's great. That's really nicely sets up the tone as well for the discussion of the Spirit Garden, Theo.
Mm-hmm.
I think I might start by just discussing that the Spirit Garden, I'm conscious of how much to set it up versus describing it so people can visualize it. But I think it's important to, mention that the Spirit Garden is an act of reconciliation. And it actually acts on a recommendation of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission to directly address persons lost due to residential schools and the terrible colonial legacy that we have here in Canada. So I'm going to, just to start us up, read the Reconciliation Report recommendation, which the Spirit Garden addresses, and allow you to talk to that, and then perhaps fairly quickly we'll get into actually describing the garden so people can figure out what we're talking about here. How's that sound?
That sounds good.
Okay, good. So the Truth and Reconciliation Commission recommendation that it seems the Spirit Garden directly address reads, publicly accessible, highly visible residential schools monument in each capital city to honor the survivors and all the children who were lost to their families and communities. This is, of course, an important recommendation, and all the more compelling now with the discovery of the contemporary, as we're talking, discovery of mass graves at residential schools. Do you want to speak a little bit to this as an act of reconciliation, Theo?
Absolutely. So, this is a tricky statement. So this is how I can address it. I think that we, as a project team, as a cultural center, refer to the space as a teaching, learning, sharing, and healing space. While it responds to one of the TRC calls to actions, I think as a cultural center, as a community, we have expanded that immensely. It's way beyond that at this point. The TRC call to action 82, which you're referring to, is about one small commemorative piece. They call it a monument, and this kind of speaks to the whole way the government conducts its business, right? So I think within that process, although the TRC was led by some prominent Indigenous individuals, I think they still got this wrong here in terms of the monument part, because from my work at Council Fire and working with some elders, working with some knowledge keepers, monuments are not part of the Indigenous worldviews, right? They don't exist. You don't build monuments to honor, certain things. You basically reflect you reflect in the world that we're in. And so as a cultural center, we decided to move away from that word, from monuments, because it's part of the Western worldview, and we created a commemorative art piece to honor something that is living, right? Something that is always going to be there. It's going to bring to us more than just the reflection. It's going to bring us some teaching, some learning, some sharing, and some healing. So that's the one thing, right? The second part is, I think, reconciliation. It's true that we respond directly to the TRC, but again, this is the way the government works, right? Reconciliation is a buzzword. It's attached to funding, and we, as a cultural center, we don't work like that. We essentially look at ways and means of improving people's lives, whether it's for reconciliation or anything else. So I think what we generally tend to say when it comes to reconciliation is that reconciliation is for non-Indigenous people. Indigenous people need a little bit more than that. We need restitution. So it's easy for me to say that and to understand that because I work at the cultural center. I am non-Indigenous, but I still understand that greatly. And so I don't know if that makes sense to the other listeners, to the other non-Indigenous people, but we say that reconciliation is for non-Indigenous people. For Indigenous people, we need some restitution. We need to make things right, is what we say. So this is what this project is partly about, to make things right as much as we can moving forward.
That's, if I might, that's an excellent clarification of how the public space as a art space and an educational space, both things I'm also very interested in. And as you're talking, I'm thinking about a monument. Our university got in trouble over a monument that they clung to too long, and of Edgerton Ryerson, who was a colonial presence in the public education system. And too often monuments are about individuals or heroic acts. And they also make things part of the past. So it's very interesting to me that the Spirit Garden, in your characterization of it, is a place of deep reflection and ongoing community and education, if I might.
Absolutely. It's a living space, right? I think one of the elders that really described this well to me was when they made a reference to tombstones, for example, right? So you have, if you go to the Mount Pleasant Cemetery, you have some prominent Canadian figures there with their tombstones. And there's tombstones that are smaller, some are larger. It becomes like a competition, right? That's not part of the Indigenous worldview, from what I understand. It's not about building the biggest monument or having the best monument or putting an end to a chapter in Canada's history. It's more about, this is an experience we all went through, and now we need to learn from it. And this art piece is living. It's always going to be there.
That's beautiful. Let's then move. Let's actually describe it. Let's help people. We don't have the visuals. So I'm going to ask you to actually describe the Spirit Garden. Actually, maybe even before description, you can talk a little bit about how it came to be and some of the key people who really worked towards this image of this community work of art.
Sure. That's, again, excellent question. So, again, it's just with timelines, I realized it's a little bit different when you work for a cultural center. I can't with certainty say when this project was initiated. Hard for me to explain. So, in terms of what I understand, I think this project is, like our board designate says, it's a way for us to recreate a better world, a positive, kinder, more gentle world. And so I was brought onto the project team in May 2017. I understand that the project was formally initiated in November 2016. So it's been 5 years, and I think that the project ideas came actually about in 2012 when Council Fire was hosting a regional TRC forum. So a little bit of context. When the TRC hearings and forums were happening, the government decided, I think the federal government decided to hold one forum for Ontario, which was in Ottawa, and so that was unjust, right? A lot of survivors are not able to share their stories, make that trip to Ottawa. So Council Fire decided to hold our own regional forum, and eventually the government decided to give its own blessing, whether that's necessary or not. We held our own forum, and at that forum, different ideas were discussed, and I think there was a realization that at that point that a commemorative piece, whether they called it a monument at that point, I don't know, was going to be created. And so our elder at Council Fire, who is an incredible person, and also he's a survivor from St. Anne's Residential School. His name is Andrew Wesley. He, I think, was one of the first people that advanced an idea of a turtle sculpture. Turtle obviously representing Mother Earth, and being something of relevance to all of the diverse Indigenous nations on Turtle Island. So I think, let's say 2012 is when the ideas were planted, and then in 2016 November is when they were called the Ministry of Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation from the Government of Ontario, and now I think they're called the Ministry of Indigenous Affairs. They reached out to Council Fire to see whether our center would like to lead this process, because Council Fire has served and has provided programs to residential school survivors for over 20 years at this point. So they decided to consult with Council Fire and ask whether we would like to lead this process, because the government wouldn't even know where to start with something like this. So being a center that's rooted in the community, very connected to the survivors, we decided to take on this initiative, and then as I said, the government provided $1.5 million of seed funding to explore this idea of a monument, and we took that funding and reinterpreted through our traditional and cultural worldviews, and really broadened the project. And at that point in the early days, we brought on board Anishinaabe artist and sculptor Solomon King into the team, and contracted his services to look at developing this physical art piece, commemorative art piece. And we held our engagements at various forums, at various settings. We made presentations. We were looking at a design at that point for the space, and then in those early days in 2017, 2018, when I joined the team, we started to really ramp up our relationship and negotiation with the city of Toronto. In the beginning, we were looking for a small space for the commemorative art piece, and when we realized that that's not enough, we started to go after a larger space. And so through our negotiations with various city councillors, I will say Mike Leighton being one of them, Christine Wong Tam, Joe Cressy, Joe Mehevic at that point, and others were very supportive of the project in those early days. And through our relationship with Mike Leighton and his office and Christine Wong Tam, we were able to look at the current site of the project of the garden, which is the southwest corner of Nathan Phillips Square, which is right beside the Osgood Law Society building, and north of Queen Street and south of the Peace Garden. And so that's the space that we're looking at. It's 19,250 square feet of space, and it gives us a whole substantial, significant space to work with. And that's what the TRC call to action, even though it's not important for us, it's still relevant in this case where we're looking at a highly visible, publicly accessible space.
That's it shows the complexity and the longevity and the creativity and creation of this. I would like to just a bit of clarification. So when you're talking about the government, you're referring to the federal government, right, in terms of seed funding?
No, the initial seed funding came from the government of Ontario.
Oh,
At
okay.
the time, it was Kathleen Wynne who was the premier.
I see. Okay, so the seed funding came from the province.
Right.
But also the negotiation of space happened very much at Toronto,
At the
Toronto
city level, that's right.
Yeah. Okay. And the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was a federal commission.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. The call to action is kind of interesting because it requests settlement agencies, cultural agencies, community organizations to work with the provincial government. So because these capital cities, right? There has to be a monument in each capital city.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so that's why we work initially with the Ontario government, and then we had to, for the land, for the space, we had to work with the City of Toronto government.
I see. And as you mentioned, I mean, well placed and well situated outside those colonial state
That's right.
enterprises, right?
Yeah.
And so very interesting to me that Council Fire really reinvented, not reinvented, but invented or created is a better word, something that has a different ethical worldview outside those colonial states. What if you walked us through it? As if, I know there's a 3D model of the garden that now exists?
Right, there's a fly-through.
A fly-through, yes. Since this is all verbal and on podcast, maybe you could verbally, which actually I think would be quite pleasant and interesting, walk us through the fly-through, what you might expect at the Spirit Garden. Does that sound like a good approach?
That sounds great. So as you see the video, the first thing is as a grandmother with her granddaughter wearing a ribbon skirt, and they enter the space, the garden, from the south Queen Street entrance. On the left-hand side of the video, you see the Tree of Peace, the white pine, and then on the right-hand side, you see the Métis Voyageur canoe. And then as it goes forward, you see the Inukshuk, and then you see the first on your left-hand side. You catch the first glimpse of the turtle sculpture within a water feature, and there's some boulders, rocks behind it. Then we enter the site again through the southwest entrance, and you go through the Osgood Laneway into the site, and on the right hand side is the Three Sisters art concept, which was designed by Raymond Sky, and then you pass the physical plantings of the corn, beans, and squash. And then you also see the first glimpse of the two-row or Gaswenta walkway. Then there's another rendering which is in the evening, and it goes inside and through the Anishinaabe Teaching Lodge. And the Teaching Lodge has a seating capacity for 60 individuals. It is primarily a ceremonial space. There will be opportunities for non-Indigenous folks to also see inside the space. You always enter the space through the western door, and the first site from when you exit on the eastern door is the turtle sculpture. And then one final rendering is in the evening, and you go above the Voyager canoe, which is lit up from the bottom. And then you also go fly overhead the turtle sculpture, which sits on a boulder that contains the names of the 13 residential schools that were once operating in Ontario. And as the turtle climbs over the boulder, it represents the overcoming, the resiliency and the strength of the survivors and the Indigenous nations and communities that had to experience this horrific policy. And then the video ends with a snapshot of City Hall, and if you look at the turtle, it faces northeast, and that's primarily for cultural reasons. However, it's also interesting because it's looking directly at City Hall, and so in some ways it's a reminder for the political leaders and for those individuals, their responsibility and commitment to not only the space, the spirit garden, but also to the survivors and the wider Indigenous community in Toronto. And that's it. And then the rest of the video, there's actually it was the Nibi water song. That's
Oh, yes.
yeah, that's it. And you see the some description of the various artists that were involved in the project as well.
Yes. So we hope to upload this video so people can hear both the water song and look at the visuals. Thank you so much for that description. Based on this description, can you talk a little bit about the concept of Indigenous placemaking and how the Spirit Garden addresses such?
For sure. So again, like this concept of Indigenous placemaking, or now I'm hearing a lot about placekeeping. It's a fairly new concept. It's one of those terms that has received a lot of attention and I think widespread adoption. A lot of people in many other projects that I'm involved with, they like to always include Indigenous placemaking as part of something, right? As part of whatever project maybe a level of government is involved in. So I'm a little bit critical of the term personally. I'm not sure how others feel about it. I haven't read much about it, so I'm just thinking out loud here. Obviously, with the Spirit Garden, it is part of this Indigenous placemaking, Indigenous placekeeping movement, and I would say that it is an international movement because personally I've been to Aotearoa, which is New Zealand, and they also have a widespread adoption of Indigenous placemaking and placekeeping. So what this essentially means is more and more countries and provinces or regions, territories, or municipalities with significant Indigenous population or history are making space for Indigenous presence in architecture, in urban planning, in designing cities and infrastructure or parks. And so it's really a good thing, right? If you think about it that way from a pragmatic sense. My only skepticism is that I hope that it doesn't become like a tokenism sort of thing where you only consult with Indigenous groups because it's part of a government funding criteria or because you feel the need to do it, sort of like land acknowledgements. I hope that it's more constructive than that. And then more from a theoretical point of view, like just in terms of my own thinking and working for the Cultural Center, I think that I would pose a question, as in, how can we create Indigenous placemaking or placekeeping when all of this land belongs to Indigenous people and the nations? So from a theoretical lens, it doesn't really make sense to me too much. I am involved in a lot of these conversations based on my role at Council Fire. So I'm just being frank with you and the audience, right? It's not like we stay away from these conversations or don't engage. It's just interesting from a theoretical lens, right? Because you want to be more critical, I think.
Yeah, and it's occurring to me as you talk also, those of us who are non-Indigenous and part of the colonial race and class need to approach it with respect and take the message to heart, as opposed to a place of tourism or a place of, do you understand what I'm saying?
Of course.
Especially since it's located in the City Hall Square.
Right.
There's a way, we also have a responsibility of how we come to this place.
For sure. It's very early on. I mean, one of the things we told the architect firm that works with us, they're called Gow Hastings architect firm, and they're an incredible firm. They work closely with Two Row Architects, which is an Indigenous architect firm that is also on this project as part of our team. And very early on, Two Row was really helpful in communicating this as well, that this is sort of a sacred space. Because you have a lot of significant cultural elements, and there will be ceremonies that will be conducted in the teaching lodge. And so it is part of the Nathan Phillips Square and part of the City Hall grounds. However, it's a little bit different from those other areas as well. So there may be certain times of the year where we need to barricade the space for cultural ceremonies and for important times of reflection. So I think Indigenous placemaking, in the sense of the idea, is really good. It's long overdue, and so it's great that Indigenous artists, designers, architects, engineers, and professionals are being sought out and being involved in projects all across the city, all across the province. However, as a cultural center, we need to sort of think a little bit more critically, and we need to sort of expand it, right? Make it more than just the small part of the placemaking initiatives.
Which also helps us rethink the city of Toronto,
exactly,
the province of Ontario, and the country of Canada, which is so necessary. So Theo, we have 10 minutes left. It's an easy to discuss with you. With your calming presence. Let's talk a little bit about the ethics and values underlying the creation and the work on the garden. And then there'll be a few questions after that move us a little bit away from the garden, but not completely.
Okay, so what are the ethics and values of the Spirit Garden?
Yes.
Okay, so it's a really good question. I think from where I stand, in terms of my own understanding, it's an honorable project. It's intended to be as inclusive as possible. When we say Indigenous people or Indigenous nations, it's sort of a misnomer. There's hundreds of nations, hundreds of histories, languages, cultures. So we want to be as inclusive as possible because everyone was impacted by the residential schools, by the day schools, by the industrial schools, whether they attended them or not. they were impacted by the 60s school, and so forth. So we want to make sure that it's inclusive as possible. If you look at the different elements that I described on the Spirit Garden, there's representation of Anishinaabe culture, representation of Inuit culture, Métis culture, Haudenosaunee culture, all of the different cultures that make up Indigenous nations in this country. So it's an honorable, inclusive project. Our hope is that it's about respect, that it captures the truth. It's a truth seeking and finding space. It's a space for reflection, and I guess I'll build a little bit about the restoration of identity, which I mentioned earlier. So early on, we called the project the Restoration of Identity Project because if you look at the history of residential schools, they were all about displacing or harming Indigenous identities and culture, right? By taking the children away from their families, you disrupted everything, including family lives, social ties, social cohesion, culture, language, everything was impacted. So at Council Fire, this project is just another example of how we're trying to repair and strengthen those identities again. So that's sort of what this project is about, restoration of identity. And then it's also, like I said earlier, a space for teaching, learning, sharing, and healing, right? Teaching in the sense that knowledge keepers and elders will be on site, youth curators will be on site to discuss the teachings. Like if you look at the Three Sisters, it offers a certain teaching to anybody, right? It's about harmony, it's about unity. If you look at, for example, the Inukshuk, every Inukshuk has a teaching, has a story to tell, and the one at the Spirit Garden site will have its own story. The way these Inukshuk are built and the directions they point and the features of their hands, they're all sharing something with an audience. So that's the teaching. And then with the learning for non-Indigenous people, for me, I had to undergo a whole learning process ever since I started working at Council Fire. And even before that, I was intentional in the sense that I understood that I need to learn. And so this space will make it easier for individuals like me and anyone else that wants to learn about Indigenous culture directly from the communities, right? From the people themselves. And then sharing in terms of it's a space to share these teachings. It's a space for survivors to share their experiences, and it's space for non-Indigenous people to share their experiences. For example, we're hoping to hold citizenship ceremonies on this site. It's a small site, but there's ways we can welcome newcomers into this space, into this country, into Turtle Island, right? So that's one sense there, and then lastly, healing, because that's one of the things with residential schools. It has done such harm to people, to the Indigenous communities and nations, that it will take a long time to heal. And the last residential school closed in 1996. It wasn't that long ago. And so there's a lot of healing that's needed, and we're hoping that this space can provide that in a little way for people. So these are some of our values.
Thanks for that. I'm going to switch the conversation and also start to be aware of we're coming near our time. But the first thing, both of us are non-Indigenous. So I think perhaps we'll talk a little bit about allyship, how we might conduct ourselves. Um, so let's talk. Let's just start with acknowledgement of that, and then how to think about that. How do you think about allyship?
I don't like now. I don't really think about it too much anymore because
Interesting.
because I'm sort of involved in the day-to-day workings of the cultural center, whereas if I go back 4, 5, 6 years ago, I thought about it a lot more. Once I think you're in my sort of role, you work with the communities, you work with the organizations. It's less top of mind, but that doesn't mean that I don't have an experience with it. So when I started volunteering at Task and other Indigenous organizations, my main point was to learn, right? To learn and to understand and to listen and to walk with and walk behind and support the Indigenous community members, the community itself, and the organization. So that's sort of where I came to the term allyship from. But I think being a relatively newcomer and occupant on Turtle Island, so it's a little bit different for me because I wasn't really aware where we were coming, right? We arrived to Canada in 1997, and I went all through school. It wasn't until university where I first started learning about Indigenous culture. I mean, there was a little bit in high school, but at that time in the high schools, they made it sound like Indigenous people were in the past, and so it wasn't until university. So that's when it ignited my interest, and I'm like, well, I can't be a political science major or have a master's in political science when I don't understand the true history behind this country, how it was created, and the politics that has emerged since then. So it became about learning in those days, and now it's about supporting and being there.
I think it shows your good work, and also honor that you work so closely, and your commitment. For me, I believe some of what you said, like Indigenous persons first, Indigenous worldview and voices and language first. The very special nature of this project that has a physical manifestation in space. I think it's a reminder for me as an ally how to rethink what is Canada, what is to be valued. And even your opening constantly reminds me of our being in relationship to nature, space, and other people. I think in terms of allyship, I mean, just to point out, we're in relationship before we come into this. I think we went through a time of getting to know each other, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And trusting each other and trusting we can pull this off in a respectful way. Mm-hmm. I feel like we both had that in the back of our mind. Can we do this as allies respectfully? And made a judgment to do it and act on it. So those are some of the ways. I also, believe experiencing the art form, engaging in deep reflection. When I hear about residential schools, the very church that my mother would insist I go to develop my own ethical backbone is a church that was involved in the residential school movement. So we have to break our colonizing histories and our ways of thinking and what we may value at times. So those are some of my thoughts as well around allyship. This may lead us into, unless do you have a reaction to that?
No, I think that was very well said.
Okay.
I appreciate you sharing that. A lot of churches, I will say, were involved in that process, and
Yes.
hopefully a lot of them do take responsibility now.
Yes, and that's how we face our complicity, our personal complicity as colonizers. This is probably a good segue into the question, if we might say the elephant in the room, that we're doing this through Ryerson University and Edgerton at this moment, a historical moment. Edgerton Ryerson has, there's been a recommendation by the university to change the name of the university based on the work of a committee that reviewed Ryerson's legacy, but also on quite a bit of activism. So some people are already using the moniker X University. Ryerson was involved in the creation of the public education system, but it's very clear he also made recommendations about separate schools for Indigenous persons, training to fit people into a kind of capitalist, white-defined colonial project. So we're now in a moment that the university is about to change its name, no longer honoring or being a monument, as we've said earlier, to Edgerton Ryerson, and hopefully a creative artistic learning space based on Indigenous values now. But having said all that, what does it mean for someone who's working at Council Fire or in an Indigenous agency to be here at this place at a Ryerson event, as it's currently named, and the importance of changing the name of the university?
I think it's very significant and long overdue. I applaud the task force for making those recommendations. It's kind of sad that it had to come to that, where the statue had to be toppled down, and there had to be a significant student resistance. And for someone like me, who's a PhD candidate in university, it's almost embarrassing to say that I'm going to Ryerson University not because of the academics, but because of who this individual was. And I also recognize that this legacy of residential schools goes back way before Edgerton Ryerson. So I know that it's difficult for some to acknowledge that, individuals are targeting this one person. That being said, he was the architect, and having a plaque right beside his monument, signifying that he has we accept his involvement is not good enough. And it doesn't matter if it's coming from the Ryerson Aboriginal Support Services group or anyone else. It's just not good enough for anybody. And so I'm happy that the task force made that recommendation. I'm happy that Mohamed Lachemi was able to accept it, and now Ryerson sees an opportunity to rebrand and hopefully make the university more appealing to everybody, and so it's a really good step. I think I'm pleased about it.
This will be, I'm going to end us with a last question, and maybe this speaks a little to the vitality and the growth and the change that you hope the Spirit Garden and, of course, Council Fire and the network of people you work with hope for. There was, on July 1st, 2021, this year, Every Child Matters walk. You expected 1,000 participants, but there was more like 10,000. You and Council Fire were at the head of the walk, And you had the great honor of carrying the eagle feather. How this ties into the spirit garden was that it ended at the spirit garden. So already I would say the spirit garden is active symbolically and has great import. Can you talk briefly about that walk, the purpose, the tone, and the decision to end it at the spirit garden?
Sure. Thank you for asking that question. So the walk was about honoring the spirits of the children that keep being found across this country in unmarked graves, or we call them pits. They weren't even really graves. And also to stand with and heal with the survivors that are still with us today, as well as the individuals that are being re-traumatized and impacted intergenerationally. And it was an opportunity for non-Indigenous people like myself and others to show solidarity, to walk together in unity and of one mind. And also it wasn't the reason it's called Every Child Matters is to protect everyone's children, not just Indigenous people. We don't want this to happen ever again to anyone's children. And so that's what the walk was intended to be. And in terms of the tone, it was a family event. It was really nice to see a lot of children there. I know it's a difficult topic for them, so I hope they could have seen the positiveness of the event. I had my little sister come out. She's not so little anymore, she's 13, but having her and one of her classmates come out from all the way in Clarington was like personally fulfilling for me, and hopefully others were able to come just like her from all across the province. And so I mentioned that we were expecting somewhere around 1,000. However, that was in hindsight not a accurate judgment, because we should have expected way more, because these walks were held all across the province and across the country. So it was part of a movement, and it was a movement to show support for the spirits of those children, as well as the survivors that are still with us today. And the purpose of ending it at the spirit garden, and I wasn't involved in that decision making. I imagine it's because the spirit garden, one of the main objectives is to recreate a better world. Like I said, a gentler, a kinder, a more positive, beautiful world. And so by adding it there, symbolically it represents that's the kind of world we're striving for together with everyone. So yeah, that's what the end point was about, and what the walk was in about as well.
Thank you for that, and thank you for this interview today. I know we are going to hear from the All Nations again, but I do want to say a few thank yous, but doesn't mean it's over till we hear from them. But first of all, I want to thank Kiki Roach and Salman Khan for their tireless work on Social Justice Week and for involving us. Each year I've been involved, but particularly welcome you and I, Theo, into Social Justice this week. I also want to thank yourself and Council Fire for the honor and trust to engage in this conversation. It's been a pleasure to talk to you and an honor to talk to you. And also I'd like to thank Keegan Hobson, who works as the administrative assistant to the Layton Chair, who helps us in the background often, but has a very strong ethical presence himself. So thanks to everyone who made this possible. And thanks for the Spirit Garden. So do you have any last words as well, Theo?
Not only that, thank you for having me, giving us this opportunity, and I look forward to seeing what the new name for Ryerson will be.
Yes, me too. Okay, so we will finish with the All Nations Juniors song and drumming. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Ryerson. We're back again to do a closing song. We really hope you guys enjoyed the presentation on Spirit Garden. It's going to be pretty awesome there at City Hall. So we got an honor song for you guys. That's what we're going to close off with. So thank you for having us out, the All Nation Juniors, the Toronto Council Fire.
You